Hey, it's Glenn, and today we're going to be talking about my short story collection, The Great Debate, which came out in 2003. This is my third book, technically, but as far as, because the Chronicles of Nightfire, Texas, Volume 1, it was serialized before this book came out, but it wasn't actually collected until later, so for a while I called this my second book, but really it's my third. Not that any of that matters at all, I just like to ramble so that these videos last forever, apparently. So, short story collection, there are only 4 stories in here, and it isn't like the typical collection of all the loose short stories that were out there at the time that this came out. One of my previous story publications is in this, and that's The Rainbow Colored Sheep. The other 3 stories were completely brand new for this book. It was conceived as one thing, even though there are 4 stories, and I'll explain that. It kind of started with The Rainbow Colored Sheep. This whole book is really an expansion on the themes of The Rainbow Colored Sheep, which is why that's the first story in here, because it all goes back to that story. And I will get to the meta theme after I talk about the stories individually. So if you want to know more about The Rainbow Colored Sheep, I already did a video talking about that story. If I can figure out how, I will put a link to that video here. Otherwise, it's on my website, it's here on YouTube. Just search around, but I'll try to make that easier for you. But I'm a newbie. I really have no idea what I'm doing on YouTube yet, so my apologies if I don't post a link. And if I don't, know that I tried, because I am going to try. So let's start with the first news story that was in this book, 6 Nights to Damnation, which technically is novella length. It could have been published on its own, but I would never publish this story on its own. I would never even, if somebody wanted to make a movie out of it, I wouldn't let them. Not by itself, not without the other stories. Because if you read it by itself, I think it gives you the wrong message. But if you read it in conjunction with the rest of the stories, it serves a purpose in a larger metaphor, and I will get to that at the end. But for now, this story, where it came from really was Cry Wolf, my first novel. There was this reference to a character, Anthony Paul, who had found, he was one of the people who had learned about the werewolf plague of 1850, but he wasn't around to talk to because in the book it said that in the middle of 1995 he moved away with his new wife. So, I have to be careful about asking questions about characters in my head because there's always an answer and it's always a book or a story, and I've already got so many ideas that I struggle to figure out how I'm going to write all of my ideas before I'm in my 80s, but I'm trying. So I'm trying not to ask questions like this anymore if I can help it, but it happens. Anyway, so this is one of those questions that got answered by the Nightfire universe. When I was like, so he moved away, I wonder what that was all about. Well, of course, this crazy story is what it was all about. So, again, spoilers. I always try to warn y'all, spoilers. Don't watch this if you don't want to know what happened in the story. I put this up for the benefit of people who have already read the story, so that you can know a little bit of what's, between the lines, what's going on behind the scenes, where it came from and all of that. But if you don't care, go ahead and keep watching. Otherwise, go read it, come back. Video's not going anywhere as far as I know. So, this story was spun off of Cry Wolf, just like the Nightfire series was. And in fact, I wrote this before I wrote Nightfire. It wasn't published until later. It wasn't published, it was a couple years later that this was published in The Great Debate, because I will get to that. This book, this is the hardest it ever was to write a book. Like, I'll get to that too at the end when we talk about the book itself. So, and actually this story though, Six Nights of Damnation, was probably the hardest thing to write in the whole book, because I had to really push myself. I had to push through taboos, like things I didn't want to write, I wasn't comfortable with, because that's the story. I didn't have any control over the story. I had to report it as it appeared in my head. So, Anthony Paul and his wife, well, it turns out he's a closet homosexual and has been all along, and he's trying to force himself to be married to this beautiful woman and impress his friends and family, but he stayed away forever and not really had much contact with people. So he comes home and like right away he meets a man and starts having an affair, and that man turns out to be a vampire and manipulates Anthony Paul into murdering his entire family, including his dog. And I mean, that's something I hate in story. Just kill anyone, don't kill the dog. Like, I literally, when it came time to kill the dog in this story, before I wrote it, I was standing in the shower and I was just crying because I didn't want to do it. But I knew I had to, or the story would not be genuine. It wouldn't be what it needed to be. And, you know, if all of these things are coming from my subconscious, then clearly these are things that on some level I need to process this way. I need to live these stories. And if I run from them, if I hide from them, if I try to change them from how they've presented themselves to me, then I'm not going to grow as a writer. And the story isn't going to have the impact that it would have had. It's not going to feel right to me ever. So I always, even if I don't want to, I will kill the characters that the story insists have to be killed. And that's where this story takes us. This is again an Everybody Dies story, and while it wasn't published in that period of my career where everybody dies, it was written. Probably, I think I wrote this right after Cry Wolf. So I'm still in that kind of dark place, dealing with, and this is another one that's dealing with religion. This whole book deals with religion. And because Anthony's a Catholic, his brother is a Catholic priest, and you know, every opportunity Anthony has to renounce his newfound love for this evil vampire, he turns away from it and murders someone instead to make vampire sugar daddy happy. And I mean, it's just, that's why I don't want this ever to be published on its own, because in the end, it's Anthony winds up alone, and it turns out the lover he was doing all of this for doesn't care about him at all, was just manipulating him, and now is going to feed on him. And that was the scene, that was the scene that popped into my head when I first asked this question of what was that all about with Anthony and his wife moving away. It was the very last scene, word for word, that, oh, well, he was fed on by a vampire after he left Nightfire, because what else would have happened to him? And that's how most of my stories show up in my head. They start at the end, and then from there just kind of unfold. But I usually see the end first. In fact, pretty much always see the end first. I always know how a story ends before I even get into it. And, you know, now that I think of it, the only stories that have failed to come together at all are the stories that I didn't see that way, where I don't know how it ends, and they just kind of never congeal the way that they're supposed to. So, well, you haven't read any of those because they haven't made it out of the gates. But yeah, this story has a dark ending, and it almost is like if you were to read this story by itself, my feeling is that the message would be that Anthony suffered because he was gay and wouldn't renounce it. It's like the opposite message of the overall book. It looks like it's saying, well, if Anthony had walked away from that evil lifestyle, then maybe he wouldn't have murdered his family, and maybe he wouldn't have gotten his blood sucked out by a vampire. He lived, by the way, just so you know. In case you wanted to know what happens after this, I'm actually going to address that at some point in other stories that in the universe. Like, you have not seen the last of Anthony Paul. I will say that. But anyway, so that's not the message. And I will come back to this at the end. There is a larger picture here, a larger metaphor that's the whole book. So, leaving Anthony Paul and his miserable fate behind, moving on to Christian's dilemma. This story was very personal for me. It really, all of the characters, you have Christian, you have the angel, and you have the suicide demon in his closet. And all three of those characters are me. This story was like a three-way conversation with myself. It was very intense to write, even though it seems like a fluffy little silly story. And side note, just if we're getting out of the metaphor and just going literal interpretation of this story within the Nightfire universe, yes, there are two Christian Rivers characters in the universe, because you have a Christian Rivers who shows up in the Chronicles of Nightfire Texas Volume 2. Not the same character. In fact, they are related though. So, and we'll get there. And the suicide demon is the skeleton in the closet with the gun, is Judas Styx, who is Ooga Booga's lawyer in Nightlight 2. Same guy. So, there you go. Alright, but anyway, back to the dream interpretation way of looking at my work. Christian, the character of Christian Rivers, he's struggling with his orientation. He's struggling with people telling him that he's a bad person, that he's hurting people because he won't go back into the closet, but meanwhile he's a Sunday school teacher. He's trying to live this Christian life. Like, the character's bisexual, and he has been listening to the BS of his religious dogma and the hypocrites in his church telling him he's no good, he's hurting people by being who he is, which is just not true. So he comes to the tragic conclusion that so many people in his situation actually come to, which is that he can't live like this. And, enter the suicide demon in his closet, to beat you over the head with it. It's telling him, nobody loves you for who you are. Nobody ever will. They hate you behind your back. They will never accept you. Kill yourself, because that's the only way out. You're never going to be able to be true to who you are as a biological creature and who you are as a man of faith. You can't be both. Kill yourself. And so many people give into that. And I mean, the suicide rate with gay teens is so high. And that's where Christian is at this point. He's like, all right, one more drink for the road, and then I'm going to blow my brains out. Because no one loves me. I don't love myself. It's really sad. But then, okay, so he's leaving his house and he trips over an angel. He trips over his guardian angel who... Alright, so if Christian represents my conscious mind, suicide demon represents self-criticism and it's kind of like the demon in the closet and the angel on the front porch are self-criticism versus self-compassion. The angel represents self-compassion. And these two aspects of one mind are at war with themselves. The self-hatred versus the self-love. Which one's going to win? And it's kind of like that old story that I love about the two wolves that are inside of every person, and one is anger and aggression and fear, and the other is loyalty and courage and love. And one of the characters in that story asks, well, which one wins? And the answer is the one you feed. So this is a story of Christian deciding which wolf to feed. And that's why, the angel is so sappy, because he's like the polar opposite of the demon in the closet. This angel is fully accepting all of his emotions are outside, like he wears them all on his sleeves. He's just open about everything. He cries at the drop of a hat because he's just pure emotion and empathy and compassion, and which irritates Christian. And I think that's true to these aspects of ourselves as humans. Like sometimes we're irritated by our own vulnerabilities, and they aren't weaknesses, they're vulnerabilities. And we don't like to see those exposed. Like we don't like to trip over them on our way out the door, but they're there. And if we talk to them, if we embrace them, we embrace ourselves. And it's like shining a light in a dark corner and the darkness is gone. The light overwhelms the darkness, and that's sort of the symbolism there of the angel versus the skeleton in the dark closet. And so in this story, fortunately, unlike the previous story, this one has a happy ending where Christian gets it. He agrees with the angel, he accepts himself, and he embraces himself. And the suicide demon loses its power. And he moves on with his life. And from there we go to Reverend Phillips is going to hell. Another thinly veiled, if veiled at all, story about things going on in the world at the time. So the origins of the Reverend Phillips story, which is, I love this story. I honestly haven't read this book in a while, since the last edition came out, and I was polishing it up or whatever, but I've always felt like this story is so, just why can't this happen in real life? So first of all, I wrote this as a play for a college class I was doing, and I almost kept it as a play in the book just to be different, but I wanted to expand it, and it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it fit in script form in a book of short stories, so I converted it to prose and added some scenes and everything in there. Like, it may seem over the top, like what this preacher does in the name of Jesus and in the name of hatred and fear and anger. Like, I mean, here's someone feeding the nasty wolf in himself is Reverend Phillips, but everything that he does or that he flashes back to that he had done was taken out of real world headlines at the time. There was, because, you know, there were gay bashings, there were organized gay bashings, people died, and these were Christians. There was, let me think, oh, I should have read this again before I did this chat. So we have the gay bashing, we have, right, the divorcee, the woman who wants to leave her abusive husband. Well, yes, I knew someone who was run out of her church because she left her abusive husband. And they decided, well, she's a whore because she's leaving her husband, and marriage is forever, and therefore Jesus and, you know, all the angels hate this woman. Just, we need to run her out of the church rather than do what actual gospel Jesus would have done and embraced her and forgiven her. But the church, like this kind of church, doesn't do that. There's no forgiveness, there's only judgment and contempt. And let me think. And the racist, like the biracial couple with their child in the third flashback where he gets put into that situation. Or no, it's what he had done before. That was right out of the newspaper. That this church found out that, you know, mom was a member of the church and her daughter died, or her son, for some reason I think it was a daughter, and they buried the child. Dad shows up at the funeral. Dad's black. And so in short order, they exhume the body and say, well, you have to take it somewhere else because God hates you and your biracial child. It's an abomination. It's an awful word that they throw around so much, but I mean, that actually happened. And so I gave one preacher all of these things. He did them all. And I thought, you know, because of course at the time and still today we've got Westboro Baptist Church, which is just an awful organization that they picket military funerals. God hates America, God hates gay people. I'm not going to use the slur that they use, but they're all about God hates people. It's like they ignore the four gospels. And how can you be a Christian organization and just ignore the teachings of the gospels? I don't understand it, but I always thought it would be, I mean, that's kind of where this story comes from too. Like, what if the head of Westboro Baptist Church had a Dickensian Ebenezer Scrooge-like epiphany, and what would it take to get him there? So instead of being visited, and you know, if I'm blatantly ripping someone off, I always point it out in the story because it's an homage to that kind of story. It's an homage to A Christmas Carol. So, you know, we talk about Dickens in this story, the spirit that comes to Reverend Phillips, who used to be one of his disciples, but was also living a lie. Like, this spirit was a closet gay person and followed Reverend Phillips on all of these mission trips to beat gay people with baseball bats, and just because he was fighting himself. He was fighting what he didn't want to be and what he had been taught was an evil within himself. But when he crossed over, he learned that it wasn't an evil, that he was who he was intended to be on the inside, that his sexuality wasn't a bad thing. It was just a thing like anyone else's. So he comes back to enlighten Reverend Phillips, because Reverend Phillips is bound for hell if he keeps living like this. And so instead of 3 spirits visiting him, it's just one, and he takes him, instead of just showing him things, like, this is what I thought was fun, is he actually puts Reverend Phillips into the bodies of people in similar situations to the ones he had condemned before. And Reverend Phillips has to actually be these people. He has to actually walk the proverbial mile in their shoes. He has to be a battered wife. He has to be a gay man. He has to be a gay man in love. He has to be every member of an interracial family and experience that love from every angle of it before he comes back. And he has all of these experiences now firsthand. He's kind of been force-fed empathy, and it changes who he is. And how fantastic would it be if that happened to every member of Westboro Baptist Church? That would be fantastic. I mean, instead of just living their life in fearful ignorance, if they could be enlightened and have their eyes open. That's where this story was coming from. So, anyway, there was also a story, there was going to be a 5th story in this book about an ostrich who was raised by eagles, but that's one of the ones where I had a great concept. I knew that the characters were there. The beginning of the story was there, but I had no idea how it was going to end. And getting into it, it just felt kind of like I was trying to force the story. So that doesn't work. And that's why that story was cut from the book. I just, it wasn't there, and I couldn't force it to happen. But if the end ever just pops in my head and it's brilliant, I'll write that story. And meanwhile, it's gone. All right, so let's get to the book, the whole book all together. What was it? It was The Great Debate. The title seems maybe weird, but I mean, the debate I was talking about through the title is the debate within the church about how to treat gay people. And there are people who say it's wrong in gay people, we shouldn't even baptize their children, and we shouldn't let them be members of the church, and we shouldn't let them be ordained as ministers in the church because gay people aren't real people, they're second class. But then you have the people who look at the Gospels and say, but Jesus would have accepted them whether it was sinful or not, and we should do that too. Unconditional love, unconditional compassion and forgiveness. And then you have people like me who say it's not a sin anyway, shut up. But we don't need to forgive something that doesn't hurt anyone. It doesn't require forgiveness, but it does require acceptance. And I hate the word tolerance. Don't even get me started. We don't tolerate these people. We don't tolerate people who don't conform to the perceived norms, like the You know, I mean, let's face it, it's a heterosexual white man's world, and other people are not lesser people, even though the way the world works is definitely in favor of heterosexual white males. There's nothing wrong with heterosexual white males. It's just that things are slanted, and the teaching, it's kind of like people used to be punished for being left-handed, and they would force you to write with your right hand even though you were left-handed. And it was the same as being gay in the church in recent years, that they would insist you're choosing to write with your left hand. You're an idiot for doing that. It's a sin to write with your left hand. I mean, now that sounds absolutely ridiculous. And that's because it was. Just like the way that we look at different sexual orientations, or even different genders are treated differently. Like, women can't be ordained in so many Christian denominations, and that's absurd. But anyway, moving on, that's what the great debate is. It's like, what's right, what's wrong, and why? So the full metaphor of the book, it's taking what the rainbow-colored sheep had to say and expanding it. So the rainbow-colored sheep is there as kind of a touchstone, as kind of a reference point to go back to, and we do at the end of Reverend Phillips. The Spirit of Matthew explains this to Reverend Phillips. Like, he mentions like the metaphor of a rainbow-colored sheep. He mentions what happened to Anthony Paul. He mentions what happened to Christian Rivers. And he kind of he brings it all home into the Reverend's new mission. And so the full metaphor, the vampire story, 6 Nights to Damnation. It's really, this whole book is a metaphor about coming out of the closet as a gay Christian and trying to straddle both worlds, like kind of trying to be true to yourself on every level. So 6 Nights to Damnation is a story about fear of rejection and losing all of your loved ones, and self-blame. It's kind of, these are all steps in the coming out process for a gay Christian, where that's one thing that goes through your head because of all the things you've been told by ignorant people all your life. It's that people are going to hate you if they find out. People are going to reject you. You're going to lose your friends. You're going to lose your family. So it's a terrifying thing, just the very idea of coming out. And that's where you have Anthony in this story. He's keeping it a secret. And it's not coming out that actually destroys him. It's not embracing his sexuality that destroys him. It's keeping it a secret that destroys him. And murdering his family and even his dog, like, and his friends, that all, it's part of the metaphor. The story represents his greatest fears coming to be. Like, it's what he believes. Like, if you're struggling with coming out of the closet, this story represents the worst case scenario that keeps you in the closet. And the anguish that it causes. The second story that follows the rainbow-colored sheep, Christian's Dilemma. The angel is, well, Christian, like, coming to terms with the angel and leaving the demon behind. And the demon is kind of coming from where we got with 6 Nights to Damnation. Like, the whole, you're a terrible person, no one will ever love you, kill yourself. So you have a choice now. Like, you have this fear and this dread and this misery. What are you going to do? Are you going to give up? Are you going to shoot yourself in the head and not move forward? Or are you going to grow stronger and move forward and accept who you are? And in this story, that's Christian with the angel. This is acceptance. So you go from fear and dread to acceptance and saying, this is who I am, and in spite of all the terrible things I've been told, this is good. This is who I am supposed to be. And if you're looking at it from a Christian perspective, this is who God made me to be. And so you go from fear of rejection and self-blame to self-acceptance, self-love, self-affirmation. And then we go into the meaning of the last story of Reverend Phillips is going to hell. This is the last part of it. You've accepted yourself and you've come out and you've stood up for yourself. And the next part is becoming proactive, is walking in other people's shoes, is looking at other people who are oppressed and beaten down, standing up for them too, standing up for other gay people, being there for people who are going through what you went through, and showing them what can happen if they don't give up. That, it's like the book is the ultimate it gets better PSA from from where I'm sitting at my writer's desk. So that's the metaphor. It's a metaphor for coming out, accepting yourself, and going from there to being proactive, standing up for your group that is oppressed, pretty much, and for other groups that are oppressed. Because that's kind of one of the things we get to in the last story, is that it's not just about gay people, it's about a lot of different people. There are different rainbow-colored sheep in this flock that are rainbow-colored in different ways and for different reasons, and they're all just as valuable, and they're all just as worthy of being fed as any of the other colored sheep. So that is what the book is about, and that is why I refuse to let Six Nights to Damnation ever be published on its own, because you lose the meaning of the whole book if you just look at that story. It's a piece of the overall message. And so this book has always been deeply personal to me. It mirrors my own journey in a lot of ways, and I think I'm proud of this book, and I'm very happy at the response. This is one of my most widely read books, and even during this free ebook promotion, it's picked up it's picked up more new readers than any of the other stuff that's been offered so far for free. And I'm very gratified by that, because it's a message that I want out there. But please, if you, it's kind of like with Nightlight. I always want people to read Nightlight too. I really hope that people reading this book will read it cover to cover, that they'll get the whole message. Don't stop after Six Nights of Damnation. That's my biggest fear about anyone reading this book. Don't get the wrong message, get the right message. And that goes for life too. If you're in church, don't get the wrong message, get the right message. Ignore the people who are throwing hate at you. Ignore them because they're wrong. Look at the Gospels, look at Jesus if you're living as a gay person in the church. Don't hide who you are, and don't accept anyone's rejection. That's what this book's about. So I guess I've said enough about it for now. But again, like with everything else, if you have questions that I didn't answer, if there's anything else you want to know about this book, send me your questions. I will eventually do another Q&A somewhere down the road, and I'll try to answer all of the questions that I get. As far as availability, this book is in hardback that I've shown you. There's a paperback, a trade paperback, that I just realized I don't have one, so I can't show it to you. I need to get a copy of the paperback. And there's a Kindle ebook that isn't for free, but I couldn't work it out for some reason, and I'm still working on that. I don't know why I can't make it free like everything else that I've got up on Amazon, but meanwhile, through I think it's July 16th of next year, June or July, I think it's July, the PDF ebook of The Great Debates is on my website, glensladeclarkjr.com, and it's going to be free throughout this year of free ebooks. So you have plenty of time to read this book for free, and I sincerely hope you'll take advantage of it, and that you will grow from this book the way that I grew from writing this book. So that's all I've got to say about that. Until next time, happy reading, and I'll talk to y'all later.